voice of the Father. It's not my job to be the voice of the Father for you. It's my job to give you the opportunity to hear the voice of the Father. Now, isn't it interesting that we consider worship today, which is part of it, worship singing choruses? Well, if we're always singing choruses, when do we get the opportunity to hear his voice? Now, isn't that interesting? And God constantly is saying in the middle of our worship, I want to tell them. In the middle of the room tonight, I'm not just saying that, and the guys know that, and you can check my website and the tapes of all the sermons. I don't ever remember ever saying, in the middle of the room tonight, God's longing for the cry and the song coming from the middle of the room. In the middle of the room, there's a voice that God wants to hear. It's always new with you, Jesus. You're changing us into your image. And you're calling us friends. John 21:15, Jesus says, he asks Peter this question. He says, Peter, do you love me? And that's kind of where we started tonight in the spirit and the music. Peter, do you love me? And Peter kept saying, yeah, I like you, Jesus. And Jesus kept saying, Peter, do you love me? Or Jesus kept saying, Peter, do you love me? And Peter kept saying, I like you, Jesus. And finally, Jesus said, Peter, feed my sheep. And I was thinking about that today, and I was thinking about that this week, and I was thinking about that in the middle of our worship. I was thinking about this friend of mine, Don Potter, and I were talking, and he said to me a few weeks ago, talked to him, and I said, we were in Charlotte at the same time, and so I called him the next day, and I said, hey, Don, what were you feeling in Charlotte? He said, well, I was getting kind of the quitter spirit, and I started speaking on this message. I said, well, what'd you speak on? And he said, well, I just started talking about when Jesus asked Peter, do you love me? And Jesus was asking, he was offering Peter love, and Peter settled for work. He settled for labor. And I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, I've been really upset lately because we've been praying for this girl to get healed. And Jason, she died, and I went to the funeral the other day, and we did everything to pray for her to be healed. Everything. We prayed every prayer. We prayed the word over her nonstop. We had people nonstop praying the word, praying over her, going to the hospital, going to her home, going and praying over her family, going and doing deliverance, doing all these various things. And we looked at her, and Jason, when she died, the day she died, she looked worse than somebody that if you would have dug them out of the grave after being dead for 10 years. She looked worse than that. I said, well, what do you mean? He said, Jason, I said to the Father, I said, God, this is not right. We did everything. Why didn't our prayer move you? And the Father spoke to him and showed him this verse and showed him the passage of Ephesus where he says, you've lost my first love. You've done all these good works. You've done all these various things. You have a name and a reputation for loving me and laboring for me. But I have this one thing against you. You've lost your first love. I said, so what's the crux? He says, the crux is, Jason, that we can settle for labor, and God's offering us love. And the sad thing about that is we can labor and labor and labor, and it offers us nothing. Because God's heart is not moved by labor, it's moved by love.
That's right.
So I started thinking about that, and I went to this passage, do you love me? And I started pondering, do you ever do this when you're on planes? Or when you're just working? And you're not in the environment of necessarily hallelujahs? And you just have to find a way to worship. And what I often do is just find one verse that I can just ponder on. And so this verse came to mind. Matthew 5:6. Blessed are those that hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. And then I just said it over again. Blessed are those that hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Let's just worship with that tonight. Just say that with me. Blessed are those that hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Let's say it again. Blessed are those that hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. And I started thinking about that. Blessed are those. And then I got to that word, satisfied. And I just felt the Spirit of the Lord come upon me a few weeks ago and say, satisfied. Are you satisfied? I love how another Bible translates this. It says, blessed are those that hunger and thirst for God's approval. They will be satisfied. The Message puts it this way. You're blessed when you've worked up a good appetite for God. Because he's food and drink and the best meal you'll ever eat. I love that. It's like God, like what he said to Jonah, run, baby, run. My hands release you, baby. Run, baby, run, just as fast as you can. Run till your legs lead your heart to the real truth. You're my daughter. You're my son. Run, baby, run, baby, run. Because in the middle of your running, you're going to end up running right into me. In the middle of your running, you're going to run right into your destiny. So get over it and run. Run, run, run. Work yourself up a great appetite running after man and the approval of man, even right in the church. Even calling yourself a worship leader. Go and get the approval of man. And kill yourself getting the approval of man. And all it's going to do is it's going to feed this hunger, this insatiable desire for you to finally come to the one that's satisfied with you so that you can be satisfied. And you'll never be satisfied until you get to the one that's satisfied with you. See? And then you can really start loving. And then you can really start worshiping. Then you're really blessed. Whoa! Right? Jesus was the new Adam. Here's Adam. Think about this, guys. Here's Adam. Adam gets to walk with God. Adam's with God. Adam has every animal, every plant, every flower, everything, guys. Everything. He's got everything. And he isn't satisfied. In fact, he's lonely. So God gives them Eve, and they're not satisfied either. You think about this, guys. They had the tree of life in the garden that they could have eaten from. You see the tree of life come back up in Revelation. They had the tree of life, and they chose the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That's kind of what we were singing about in worship tonight. See, this is the lost art in worship. It's called the Bible. See, so in worship, when you do that, when you move there, you're not moving there. You think you're moving there in random acts of worship. You see? But God's in all of it, and we have to have ears to hear. But in the middle of the worship, this all came up. In the Spirit, God says, am I enough for you? Because that insatiable desire in you will only be quenched when I'm enough for you. Is my approval enough for you? My approval was not enough for Adam because when I created him, I said he was good. Jacob dresses himself up like his brother,